All righty. Good afternoon. Round six, round seven. Where are we at, bud?
I don't know. We have to stop meeting like this, John.
Absolutely. So we'll let a few folks filter in here. Bay meteorologist John and Todd. We are watching another round of storms that are pushing to the southeast. We do favor there to be some intensification, some strong to severe gusts. And then I want to discuss the latest on flooding. You can see on our current radar those flood warnings still in effect. And I will toggle while we're letting some folks filter in some of our flood watch products as well. Those dashed green areas represent our flash flood watches that are in effect. With the main concern, Todd, is not going to necessarily be this round for flooding that is pushing into the southeast, but more storms that can build overnight and sit over the area as we get into the AM hours.
Yeah, it's kind of the same forecast, right? We deal with these clusters of storms, and then, yesterday it kind of moved through, which was beneficial, at least in the afternoon and evening hours. But you think back to what was Tuesday night into Wednesday morning, we had the strong storms go through on Tuesday, and then that band kind of set up north and east of Indy, and that's what brought that tremendous amount of rainfall to the area as we worked our way through yesterday morning, and that's where we still have all the flooding, and you can see those higher rainfall totals in the darker blue there. I mean, 10 to 15, 16
Yeah.
inches of rain, unprecedented in many locations. I-70 is closed there in Wayne County because the westbound lanes of I-70 were washed out. And so, that's going to be the key here. We're going to be talking about the potential for severe weather, but I think what might be on the top of people's mind more so than the potential of severe weather is the additional potential here for the heavy rainfall, John, as we work our way late tonight into early Friday morning, which we'll kind of dive into here as we go.
Absolutely. And just to mention, this gold circle, if you will, is representing a severe mesoscale discussion. It's a product the Storm Prediction Center puts out. And after chatting with our team, Todd, not a lot of disagreement that a watch may be needed as the storm cluster starts to turn a little bit more to the east southeast, especially for, once again, damaging winds would be the primary concern. And I want to show Todd Brett's nowcast again as well. And this is, again, another product that, and I'll zoom out a little bit more so we can see our faces. Well, that didn't work, Todd. Hang on a second. I think what we'll do is I will maximize this and take our faces away for a second. There we go. So that you can see this particular graphic with the timings. This represents the general track of the storm cluster, and those areas in the red shades represent the scattered severe potential of gusts of 60 and some small hail possible. So I would say that this is, once again, similar to yesterday, Todd, not a widespread severe event by any means like we saw a couple of days ago, but more the southern edge of this cluster, the more localized area we can see some of those damaging gusts and hail.
Yeah, even when severe weather events are similar, they're never exactly the same, right? So there's always going to be a little bit of a difference. You think back to Tuesday, we had the widespread damaging wind anywhere from 70 to 80 miles per hour in Northwest Indiana. Maybe some of those gusts were even a little bit higher. Then yesterday, we had a few isolated tornado warnings that you and I, John, covered throughout the late afternoon hours there in far southwestern portions of Indiana. Quick little spin up. They did confirm an EF1 tornado down in Knox County last night. You and I were on the live stream right away when that tornado warning came out near the Bruceville area. So we didn't have that on Tuesday as far as the tornado warnings go, but we had the widespread wind damage. And so now as we kind of look at today's event, I think it's going to kind of more favor what we saw yesterday. There may be some wind warnings that come out here, maybe an isolated quick spin up tornado on the southern flank of that. But I think this is going to be kind of more another heavy rain and wind event for us as we start to get going here into the afternoon hours. This morning across most of central Indiana, especially Indy North, we woke up to a lot of fog. There was a dense fog advisory. I was just out running to get some lunch, and it is warm, it is steamy, the sun is out. And that's going to kind of, I think, help set the stage here for some stronger storms later on this afternoon.
Absolutely. I did see the sun. It felt like for the first time in a while, Todd, as I was driving in, you can see those temperatures starting to heat. You know what? This is actually a good way to visualize this as well. Notice the temperature gradient, your difference where we start getting more to the 80s, 90s. That's and I have the lightning turned on for a reason, where you can see that gradient as to where it's starting to lean and want to turn more to the southeast.
Yeah, I think that's the area here going forward this afternoon that we're probably going to keep an eye on. You know, I keep an eye on, at least here, as we go into the afternoon hours, for maybe some of those stronger storm developments. Little different there than the mesoscale discussion that they have out there. I probably maybe would have turned that a little further towards the southeast a little bit through Springfield and then down towards the Terre Haute area. But you know, that's just the discussion.
Sure.
Eventually, the watch will come out with the actual counties, I would think, here at some point this afternoon.
Absolutely. And I saw a comment as well about there are no warnings on it actively, and that is correct. So we're waiting for it to start to intensify over the next hour as it pushes into a better environment. A lot of times when these storm clusters are coming out of the late morning hour, early afternoon, they go through a lull where they're still sustaining, they're still existing, but those winds are not yet to the point where they're reaching the surface. Before we continue this analysis, one thing I wanted to mention, I showed meteorologist Brett Waltz's Nowcast, and I'm about to show some of the products that meteorologist Jacob Wagner and our team have been working on. But for access to these or daily video updates, you can scan that QR code in the upper right-hand corner, get access to our BAM weather app, where we discuss this daily. And the Nowcast, sometimes they're coming out every 1 to 2 hours, depending on how the threat evolves. So as we're assessing it, we always try to provide more of a visual than just us talking for a minute or two and pointing at things. We want you to have those tools that you can share with your business partners, family, and friends. So in terms of our latest severe maps, Todd, I'll run through these as well. This is what we're looking at from a low-end possible scenario. In general, I don't think, again, this is a widespread risk. You can see some of these. I'll maximize this again for those of you that can see the legend a little bit more clearly. That yellow area right now is where we're looking at the 55 to locally 70 and some hail being possible. Todd mentioned an interesting point, and I think it's very true. The isolated tornado being possible right now in the current Nowcast that we have. It's not a threat in my opinion, but I do want to watch that southern edge at this time, because I think that can be a very similar occurrence that we can see here, Todd, from yesterday, where as we start to get more of an organized cluster, if we get an outflow, a brief spin up can't be ruled out. So
yeah, it's one of those things I think we're going to need to see evolve a little bit here as we go through the afternoon, and as the things kind of evolve in central Illinois there this afternoon. I think that'll kind of give us a little bit of an idea or perspective of what we could see here in central Indiana as we work our way. The storms work their way into our area this afternoon and into the evening hours. So yeah, while there's no active warnings on there right now, earlier this morning there were some thunderstorm warnings along that. So it's going through a little bit of a cycle here. But now as we're starting to get more into the peak heat of the day, certainly some strengthening will be possible. And that's why we do these, right? We come to you, yes, when there are active tornado warnings out there, but we also come to you when there's not necessarily any warnings out there right now, but we're telling you about the perspective or the possibility of warnings being possible here throughout the day. And it's all about preparation, right? That's why we do this, to prepare you, your family, and or your businesses for the potential of severe weather, just letting you know what's heading potentially our way.
1,000%, Todd. I couldn't have said it any better myself, and that's why we wanted to come on and give a little preview of what we're looking at. We may need to do another live later as this round works through. We'll have to see how this evolves, but a general idea. I just showed the Nowcast for timing, but I wanted to give folks a visual of the simulated radar, and you can see the times in the upper right hand corner in the Eastern time. This might not look like the prettiest storm cluster you've ever seen, where there's very little difference between no rain and rain and this bow feature, but it still can have the capability of producing some of those scattered damaging wind gusts. Even a few thunderstorms, Todd, can develop out ahead of it. We're already starting to see that on radar in southern Illinois, southern Indiana, that we'll need to keep an eye on as well. But as we loop through the simulated radar, 5 p.m., which in general is right around, as you can see, Brett's now cast 4:45, 5:45, right in that window, 6 p.m., 7 and 8 p.m. So in general, favoring a little bit more of that southeasterly tug as we start to get more into the Louisville, greater Cincinnati area. And then Todd, after we get done with the main severe event, if you will, our primary concern for the Thursday evening timeframe, I would say, oh, thank you guys. Let me turn off the QR code. Sorry. Once we start getting into the evening, so this would be, we'll jump back here, 6, 7 p.m., 8 p.m. I do think that the next area that we need to keep an eye on is going to be more of a stationary band that can develop across northern Indiana. Now, Todd, I'd be curious to know what you think about this. We have that storm cluster, right, that works through central to southern Indiana. I'm wondering if we can see, as these models depict this training band of heavy rain and thunderstorms, perhaps trend a little bit further to the south, which would be, of course, extending that flash flooding risk further to the south, but it might be some good news maybe for Muncie and Wayne County and some of those areas that don't even need another drop of rain.
Yeah, I saw, I believe it was Mary. I'd have to go back here in the comments. So I apologize if I have your name wrong. She was in Henry County. She's like, can Henry County please opt out of the rainfall for today? And you are not alone. I'm sure a lot of people here across central Indiana don't want to see any rain, especially for those of you that are still dealing with all that flooding. But getting back to what you were mentioning, John, yeah, I think, that's what I love about weather, right? Because one thing influences the next thing, and it's always changing. It's always a fluid situation. And so when this big cluster of storms comes through, or large cluster of storms, however you want to describe it in size, comes through later on this afternoon, that's going to kind of dictate the path. That's going to kind of dictate, I think, like you mentioned, where that band sets up with the heavy rainfall later on this evening. I think, if anything, yes, we'll most likely have to shift it probably a little bit further to the south, which would kind of bring the Indy metro area into a little more play there. And this is going to be as you're going to sleep tonight into the overnight hours. So kind of keep that in mind. But I think by time you get to, bedtime hours, 9:30 to 11:30, tonight, you're going to be able to kind of see where that band is starting to set up. And so if it's starting to set up in your neighborhood during the evening hours, and you're in areas that potentially could flood a little more than other areas and lower levels, you probably may want to be a little more aware overnight tonight than other areas where it's not going to be raining. And this band might only be 10 to 15 to 20 miles wide as far as the heavy rainfall goes. So it's not going to be the case for all of us in central Indiana. But certainly I do think some areas could pick up 2-3 inches of rain, if not a little bit more, where that band does set up, John.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, again, one weather model out of many that we look at. But I want to point out, look at these narrow streaks that the model, the behavior of the system is trying to depict, county to half county wide streaks of those 3+. So that's what we're talking about when we say a narrow corridor. It's not necessarily the entire state of central Indiana is going to get 4+ inches of rain, but there can be these narrow corridors where those thunderstorms set up. And I want to show meteorologist Jacob Wagner's flooding risk map as well. And I think the important takeaway with this is not only the flooding concerns that come with that heavy rain, but the flash flooding risk. So we have that high risk area still for Lafayette, Muncie, and Dayton, because if that band does favor and tend to be more along into the north of I-74 corridor, those flash flood warnings are going to get out. They're going to be issued very quickly, given the amount of rain that we've seen. So again, we're just talking about the risk and the trends that the heaviest of the bands may be able to come a little bit more to the southwest, which would not be good news, of course, for Indianapolis and Cincinnati. But again, for some of those areas that measured on radar saw 10 to 15 inches of rain, that would definitely be a concern. There's one other note that the AM crew wanted me to mention with this wave as well for the morning hours. Obviously, if we see any organization, which is certainly possible, as we get from the 3 to 6 a.m. window especially, we can see a few strong storm statements and severe thunderstorm warnings that may be needed to be issued by either our team or the National Weather Services. They will be dealing with quite a lot of energy that we'll be working in. We'll have more moisture and a low-level jet helping to support this area as well. So I would say, Todd, that in terms of the strongest severe risks, they're not my primary concern compared to the flooding. But whether we're talking about hail, some damaging wind gusts, I think those would be other factors that we will need to watch out for with this overnight wave as well.
Yeah, I think wind would be the main threat during the overnight hours with this wave. I saw one comment on the side here about, can I sleep in my bed or do I need to sleep in the closet? I think you can sleep in your bed tonight. I
Yes.
don't think
Yep.
you need to worry too much about the threat of tornadoes here throughout the overnight hours. So that's the good news. Like John, my biggest concern will be for flooding. Especially if this band sets up once again in areas that are still currently flooded across the area. I just want to quickly mention this, John. The National Weather Service here in Indianapolis, they put out a statement this morning, and this kind of puts it into perspective, the flooding that we've been dealing with. So back in 2019, and that's when the National Weather Service introduced the considerable flash flood tag on their flash flood warnings. And since 2019, they only had issued 10 of those.
Yep.
So over the course of 7 years, only 10 times. Yesterday, they issued 14 of them. So they surpassed that in one day. And then it was also the first time their office ever issued flash flood emergencies, and they issued 3 of those. So it just kind of shows you how unprecedented the flooding was yesterday in eastern Indiana. And now the big question mark again is going to be, unfortunately, where is this heavy rain going to set up again late tonight into tomorrow morning?
Yeah, just as you were talking about that, I was pulling up that tweet. 14.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, it's it's crazy to think about. There's something else I saw as well that I wanted to relay to folks. If you use a weather radio, especially in your Muncie or Delaware, that is off air until further notice because the transmitter site has been flooded. So you will need alternative ways of receiving alerts as well. Again, BAM Weather app has you covered there, but make sure to be aware of that. If you have friends and family, share that with them. Let them know that if they're relying on the old school weather radio that a lot of us have, I still have one too. When those transmitters get flooded, it's happened before. That can cause problems with that particular alerting source. So
yeah, it's always good to have a backup alerting source. Weather radios are great, but it's always good to have a backup. And obviously, you do have that with the BAM home platform if you subscribe to that, and if you don't, certainly would be advisable to do so.
Absolutely. I want to answer one question before I move on with this analysis. Christy, why does the future radar in the app differ from what you are showing? So the future radar is a single run of the model called the HRRR, and it comes out every single hour. So one of the primary reasons that we do those video updates, the live streams, the reels that you see in the app is because there are times where we will not always agree with that future radar that is coming out. It might not be initializing as well. I saw somebody ask the question, why are we using the 0Z HRRR instead of the 6 or 12Z? So that's why we come on here and talk about it, because weather modeling data is not going to be perfect. That's why there's still meteorologists. We're real meteorologists. We're assessing the forecast. We're always going to need real meteorologists. I'll throw that in there as well for that particular reason. But great question for sure.
If a model doesn't initialize correctly, there's no point in using it over the next couple hours. So it's just because it's the most current one doesn't mean it's always the correct one. And as John mentioned, that's why you need the actual meteorologist to interpret that and relay that data. And now you read my mind there, John, going over to live radar. We just got a thunderstorm warning out there in central Illinois. So I think that's probably the start here of what's going to be a more active afternoon for any of those of you in the Peoria, Bloomington, Champaign area, maybe even down towards Decatur over the course of the next couple hours.
Absolutely. And yeah, just to that last point, that's what I wanted to show, Todd. This is the most latest 6-hour run of the weather model that we're using. And it tries, but it is not nearly as correct with the initialization as the 0Z model was early this morning in terms of it being a little bit more to the south. and where those storms are at. So Hope sent me a message as well. The SPC, I wanted to show that there is a new map that has come out as well for today's outlook, and that looks very similar to what we were looking at on the weather, the severe map that Jake Wagner made this morning. A lot of our other AM crew worked on. So we're straight through central Indiana. That's been extended, Todd.
Yeah. So the slight risk, for those of you that didn't see it this morning, really only kind of came up to the state line and basically stayed off to our west in Illinois. But now the Storm Prediction Center has extended that slight risk, which is level 2 out of 5, into a good swath there of central Indiana. And that's mainly going to be, again, for damaging wind threats. And then also the potential maybe of a quick spin up tornado. Keep in mind, flooding is a different risk than what we just showed you there. This is basically for the severe criteria, so it'd be wind, hail, and tornadoes. So this doesn't include the flooding risk, but that will be there as well when all this heavy rain moves through once again.
Absolutely. And question on where a lot of this moisture is coming from and why we're in this pattern. We'll take a couple questions here, and then we're likely going to sign off, guys, in the next few minutes. Keep an eye on things, and then we'll look into potentially another live as we get a little bit closer to this event. But right now, what we're dealing with is we have a heat dome or a high pressure system that is sitting across portions of the central U.S., and we have monsoonal flow that's working around it, and that's also coming from the subtropical jet. So as a result of that, you're getting a lot of these ridge runners, ring of fire setups where a system or a shortwave mixes with that moisture. It comes down and then starts to work through the lower Great Lakes. So that pattern, Todd, is going to continue. I did look at some of the long range this morning. I haven't chatted with Brett yet. The severe risks didn't look as intense as we get into the weekend, knock on wood. It looks like some general showers. So I do think we can see a break in that perhaps, but still that moisture train is just going to continue.
Yeah, there were models were hinting a little bit that high kind of moves a little bit closer. So what that would do is take the path of these storms, which have been right through central Indiana, kind of nudge them a little bit further to the north. And it's going to cut off the moisture flow a little bit too. So it might not be as much in the way of that monsoonal moisture coming up and around this area of high pressure. But I do think thunderstorm chances do remain in the forecast as we get into the weekend, albeit they become a little more spotty in nature, kind of more your typical daytime thunderstorm activity popping up rather than exactly what we've been seeing the past couple days.
Yep. Yeah, and that we start looking at height lines real quick. Technical lesson meteorology 597, 594. Usually those clusters have a tendency to ride more around those bearings. So that's something we'll have to watch. I had a couple questions real quickly. Recap timing. Yes, I will go ahead and show that nowcast once again that's currently active. I think it's doing very well with that. We'll maximize that so folks can see it again. Timing, we're going to zoom in even more. This is the arrival of when we can see those thunderstorms. Those of you in the red area have the greatest risk of seeing some severe gusts, some hail, and perhaps a brief tornado on the southern edge, similar to yesterday. The damaging wind gusts and flash flooding are really the primary concerns. Of course, the main flooding risk starting later overnight. So share this with a friend, take a screenshot. Obviously when we sign off the stream, this is about a 25-minute live. So you can still send this to other people. It's not going anywhere. We just won't be live anymore, but it'll still be that video that you can go back and scan through as we go through this analysis as well. So guys, that is all that we have for now. Todd, any last thoughts before we cut this off?
Yeah, just to kind of recap what John said as well. So the way I think you want to think about this is, because there's a lot of questions about flooding, a lot of questions about severe weather. So I think the way you want to think about this is kind of break it down into time frames. This afternoon, you're concerned a little bit more potentially about the severe threat as that cluster of storms that's in Illinois comes in. So wind, the main threat, obviously some very heavy rainfall with that, which could lead to some flash flooding. And then as we get closer to the bedtime hour tonight into the overnight hours, I think your concern is less for the potential of severe weather. The question mark is where does that band of heavier rain set up late tonight into early tomorrow? And that's where that flooding concern is going to become a little more prominent. So again, more wind threat throughout the afternoon hours. And then as John's circling that later tonight, more of a heavy rain threat on a band that may only be 10 to 20 miles wide. But within that band, we could easily see 2 to 4 inches of rainfall before it kind of ships up and moves out of the area as we work our way throughout the day on Friday.
Well done. Love it. Hopefully we can see less flooding reports tonight, Todd. That is my sincere hope, and that we can see perhaps the models back off of it. Right now, I don't see that, but we will watch the trends closely, as I just do not want to see any more of those pictures. So to kind of end this here, thoughts and prayers with all of those that were impacted by the storms. Northwestern Indiana a couple days ago, but the flooding, the major regional flooding we're seeing across the eastern half of Indiana. So thank you guys for your attention, your support. We will assess if we need to come back live as we get later on, as the storm continues to track to the southeast. Continue to pay attention to social media and as we track this.